What's up, everybody? I'm Jack Slater, aka the Comic Outlaw. Yeah, and I'm back. Yes, yes, I'm back indeed. And what are we talking about? Well, I've been reminiscing about the old days. I've been watching episodes of Nitro back in the old days, the 90s, 94, 95. And I noticed something, and it's something that's always bothered me. Like even back in the day when Hogan first did his big heel turn, I was not very surprised when it happened. I know everyone else in the world is like, oh my god, Hogan's a bad guy. Oh. Now, for me, it just sort of fit together if you had all the pieces to the storyline. Don't know what I'm talking about? Let me explain. For those newer wrestling fans that aren't familiar with the legacy of Hulk Hogan and they're only familiar with wrestlers like John Cena or Roman Reigns, let me pacificate. Let me talk a little bit. Let me step on my soapbox. Now, Hulk Hogan ushered in a golden age of wrestling in the 80s. When Vince McMahon syndicated everything, Hulkamania, he was the main star. He was everywhere. The problem was, as popular as Hogan was, and this was a tradition before Hogan, with Bruno Sammartino, for example, and where they held the belt for a long, long, long time. And Hogan had a very similar run where he held the belt for long periods of time, and then he would lose it to people, and then he would get it back like Savage or the Warrior, but it would always end up back in the hands of Hulkamania, which did not give a lot of the other guys or villains any kind of chance. And this is what kind of separated WCW or N.W.A wrestling from WWF wrestling. Hulk Hogan's matches were quick. Ric Flair's matches usually lasted longer. And Ric Flair passed. There was different champions over the years. Sometimes the same man had the belt, but there was notable changes, shifts in the championship, which in other situations, especially WWE, it just did not happen. WWF, WWE, and people kind of got worn out of Hulkamania. Say your prayers, eat your vitamins. Hogan's always going to win, or Hogan's always going to get the belt. And by the time one of the WrestleManias rolled on, it was the one with Bret Hart and Yokozuna. Hogan came out and got the title. That was pretty much the end of what I think the good guy era was, which kind of led to the New Age era where Vince was trying to do new people like Razor Ramon and stuff. And Hogan just decided to retire. He made Vince a handshake deal saying he was never going to go against him, but come on, enough money. 1994, he ends up with WCW, and like if you watch the WCW run and just like not the N.W.O stuff, you kind of see that Hogan was built as this big champion. He steamrolls over everyone, and it makes him insanely unpopular. I mean, people hated him in the South, because he was this guy from New York. He just took over. He beat Ric Flair several times. I mean, Hogan had creative control over his contract. That much we did know. So Hogan went against Flair not dozens of times, but many, many times where it should have been more balanced. I mean, you could tell that Hogan was just steamrolling it over everyone, that he was trying to recreate the 80s in the 90s there, and it just wasn't working out. People were booing him. And a very interesting thing happened around, I'd say, 95, where they formed the Legion of Doom, Taskmaster. A couple guys got together. He'd been beefing with Hogan before that, an issue with his brother liking him. It kind of got weird. Kevin Sullivan became the Taskmaster after meeting the master in the dungeon, like this old wrestler named Ayakea, like back in the day. And he's like an older man now, and they formed the Legion of Doom, which had a lot of notable villains like Haku, Of course, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, who was a good guy, bad guy, good. You know what I mean? And Kamala. Of course, it introduced the Giant, and they feuded with Hogan. And Hogan would win here and there, but Hogan was also getting his butt kicked. He gotten jumped. He gotten his mustache shaved off, and the people were still booing him. And this is where they did a very fascinating experiment, I call it. Most people think that it's idiotic, but if you look at what happened afterwards in the evolution of the NWO, this sort of makes sense. Now, after Hogan gets his mustache shaved, and believe me, I'm skipping a lot of stuff because there is a lot of stuff to cover in this feud. It would literally take an hour's worth of talking. So many people were in the Dungeon of Doom. It is ridiculous. I mean, even Zeus, or Z Gangster from Friday, was in this. I mean, the ranks were just swelled up. And this was built as a hill machine for Hulk Hogan to take care of, you know, like back in the 80s, you know, you beat this person and that person, Savage would help. And for a while, they did this nice divide and conquer storyline. Pitting Sting and Luger turning against Hogan and Sting, joining the LOD for a while. That was very interesting. The storyline on that was good. Why Sting was actually fighting the Horsemen at this time, or Ric Flair being good and then turning. And that kind of evolved into the alliance to end Hulkamania with Flair and Anderson joining with the Legion of Doom and having that triple cage match where Hogan and Savage kind of beat everyone with the help of Brutus Beefcake, the Booty Man, Zodiac, whatever you want to call him. He was evil and good, and then evil and good, and then became a member of the N.W.O as a disciple. Handed the frying pans, they beat the crap out of everyone. So, as I'm trying to state here, I mean, they had basically done everything with Hogan, and this black area of Hogan, like the whole thing where the Legion of Doom, some of it's absolutely ridiculous. And I've talked about this in another DVD that I did of Hogan, where he reached out to the water. It's like, this water, it's not hot. Like, you would just not believe some of the senseless shit that happened with the LOD. But it introduced us to the Giant. I mean, Hulk Hogan getting screwed 2 times at Halloween Havoc, both getting the title screwed. He got screwed out of the title, and then when the Yeti and Big Show showed up and kind of sandwiched him. You have to watch it to understand what I'm saying. Like, these 2 giants just sandwiched Hogan at the same time. It looked nasty. And a little later, they had that cage fight that I was talking about. And through all this, they hated the New York guy. So when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash came, it made a lot of sense that it would be Hogan. I don't think it could have been anyone else but Hogan. There was talks about Sting coming into the group, but I felt that after everything that Hogan had been through, I mean, and then with Hogan, there was always a touch of ego. I mean, there was always ego in it. I mean, even in the early WCW interviews where he's talking to Macho Man or this person, Hogan always had an ego problem. And during his black spell, you know, where he was summoning the evil of Hulkamania to take out the Legion of Doom, that only lasted a few months, and then he went back to the Yellow Gold. And then about 4 or 5 months after that, and maybe 6, he actually ended up joining the N.W.O. So there wasn't like that much change, you know what I mean, between Hogan wearing black, Hogan going back to Hulkamania, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash coming, and then the Bash to the Beach, the leg drop, heard across the world where Hogan officially joined the dark side. I think the evolution of Hogan's dark side actually began the moment he got to WCW, and it evolved through the Legion of Doom, the whole thing with that, the feuds with Vader, and then, you know, the feud with the LOD, them shaving his mustache and going to the black costume, him trying that out, him going back to Hulkamania, and then turning on the Hulkamaniacs. I mean, like, I don't think this story was written on purpose to be that way, but it actually worked out pretty good if you put the pieces together. And you kind of like see, yeah, you can kind of see Hogan's steady decline from grace if he ever was there. I mean, let's face it, Hogan was a very egotistical champion in WWF. I mean, he was a good guy, but he wasn't above taking cheap shots. He wasn't above bending the rules if it suited his advantage. And he was a bad guy before he was a good guy. So, people tend to forget that. A lot of people grew up as Hulkamaniacs and just remember him as a good guy. They don't remember that he was his manager was Classy Freddie Blassie at one point, who was one of the most nefarious cheaters of all time. So yes, I was sitting there thinking, and I was like, if you actually put the storyline of Hulk Hogan in '94 coming in and then his rise, to the N.W.O, and you just look at those two parts, you're like, wow, that's a shock. But if you watch the evolution of what happened with Hogan through his run in WCW, it makes sense that it had to be Hogan to be the leader of the N.W.O. And then, of course, the N.W.O gimmick ran its course, and everything kind of fell apart from that, and blah, blah, blah. And then even Hogan's brush with Vince Russo and the clashes of egos there, it all kind of made sense. Now, I know it wasn't their intention to kind of like write it that way. Originally, it was just to build a heel machine for Hogan. But the evolution of it and what happened with Hogan, you could kind of see his steady decline into what he becomes from Hulk Hogan to Hollywood Hogan. And everyone was surprised and shocked, but for me, if you kind of put the pieces together, it all makes sense. And I recommend watching it for yourselves, checking out his feud with Kevin Sullivan, the evolution of it. I mean, it started with the Three Faces of Fear, and then it went to the Legion of Doom, their feud there, his blackface, and becoming Hulk Hogan again. The whole run. I mean, even the problems with the Giant and the N.W.O kind of come from the LOD run. So people say the LOD is really stupid, and in a lot of ways it was. But if it wasn't for the LOD, I don't think it would have gave us the boost that Hogan needed to join the N.W.O. It just made more sense that after all this crap that Hogan had been through, to join the N.W.O, like to evolve into that and to become the bad guy that he became, made so much more sense if you put all the pieces together. I mean, if you're the casual viewer and you're watching here and then you watch there, you're like, wow. But if you actually watch continuously, it all makes sense in a funky sort of way. Yeah. So this is the Comic Outlaw, and I just thought I'd share that with you. A little piece of history for people that don't know just know the N.W.O, but not the history of Hogan. I covered part of this in a Hulk Hogan DVD, but I felt I'd touch on it a bit more because I've been thinking about that since I've been watching the old Nitros. And there's been some wonderful matches in the Dungeons of Doom. Lex Luger's betrayal. Like, there's a lot of things. Luger jumps back and forth a lot like the Giants. You'll notice that. But anyways, it's actually worth watching. I know there's a lot of bullshit, and people always say that all the time. But there was a lot of crap going on in WWE too back at that time, so let's not throw stones, But anyways, I'm Jack Slater. This is my thoughts on Hulk Hogan's run in WCW. From Hulk Hogan to Hollywood Hogan. The evolution. And as always, I will catch you on the flip side. Yeah!